Good evening, a guten chodesh. We hope that the hashpah of the entire shefa of Yom Tif and all of the Yomim Tovim you're beginning to feel in your Gashmias and in your Ruchnias. Parshas Noach begins with the fact that Noach ish tzaddik, and the pasuk says it. It's the Torah. It's not an opinion of somebody. If the Torah says ish tzaddik, that means he was a tzaddik. Taimim haya b'dorosav. After the Mabul, it says vayochel Noach, and Noach he became chulin, vayochel, mundane, weekday. And it says he was an ish ho'adama. And the Medrash draws a comparison that by Noach it first says ish tzaddik. Then it says after the whole story that ish ho'adama, he became a worker of the ground and he made a vineyard to have some good wine. Moshe Rabbeinu, says the Medrash, however, began being called Ish Mitzri, which he paid because the girls, the daughters of Yisro, thought he was an Egyptian and he looked like an Egyptian. He wasn't allowed to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. To come into Eretz Yisrael, he couldn't go into Eretz Yisrael because, according to some, he hit the rock. According to the Rambam, because he said, Shimu Noha Moirim, rebellious, he as a leader, he shouldn't have called Klal Yisrael the rebellious. You can't lose your patience as a leader. But he was called Ish Mitzri, and therefore he could not enter. He couldn't come into Eretz Yisrael because of the story with the water. But Ish Mitzri prevented him from being buried. He asked, okay, I can't go in alive. At least let me be buried in Eretz Yisrael. And he didn't. He was not buried in Eretz Yisrael because of this statement of the daughters of Yisro that he looked like an Egyptian man. And from Moshe Rabbeinu, we expect more from him than to appear to anyone like an Ish Mitzri. But that's how he began. But he ended up in Zos HaBracha, Ish Ho'elokim, the godly man who achieved such level and such madrega. So the Medrash makes the comparison that Noach was first Ish Tzaddik, way up there. And then he came down to become Ish Ho'adama. And Moshe went from Ish Mitzri up into the level of Ish Ho'elokim. And the Meforshim are very quick to point out that that is the balance in life that we have to be very careful with. Because many times we can go for 60 years never missing a minyan, never missing saying a bracha to someone, like the Chavetz Chaim used to say that when somebody makes a bracha, it's a mitzvah. And the person who answers amen to the bracha gets a mitzvah for answering amen. But then the person who made the bracha, said the Chavetz Chaim, gets a second mitzvah because of his bracha. He caused a yid to get a mitzvah because he answered amen to his bracha. So now the person who answered amen gets a second mitzvah because he caused the person who made the bracha to get a second mitzvah because he caused someone to answer amen. And it goes back and forth, third and fourth and fifth. And the Chavetz Chaim said it is a spiritual, a heavenly scale that goes on forever, which is incomprehensible to a human mind. But he said that that's the power of just answering one amen to a person's bracha. And a person could go through life that he doesn't say Birchas HaShachar unless somebody, either his wife or his children, or a companion, a friend in shul, will answer for the 2 or 3 minutes, Amen, to all of his brachas. And then suddenly he goes on vacation, and he gets used to saying the brachas to himself. And he takes the 60 years of effort and suddenly changes. Now, if the Torah called Noach Ish Tzaddik, he was a tzaddik, and it says Tzaddik Tomim, Hoya B'dorosov. He was a perfect tzaddik. But even the perfect tzaddik can never lose step, because if he misses a step, he can fall down the stairs. And that has to be our safeguard, to be able to be careful that each and every day that we move up an inch. Because if we move down an inch, it can spiral. And we end up the last 10 years of our lives in a different mode from what we lived our entire life because of a twist or a turn that should not have happened. Now, the pasuk says, "Vatimolei haaretz chamas," and the world was filled with terrible robbery. And the Medrash says, Chazal say, that the Gezerah did not take place to destroy the whole world until they were enmeshed and they were drenched with the midah of stealing and robbing others. Now, we know that much, much worse happened in that generation. The end of Bereshis, which we just learned on Shabbos, says that each person did the raw according to what he, and Rashi explains that when it came to having a mate, if they wanted an animal or a man or whatever they wanted, that's what ended up happening. So there were a lot worse things that happened than the stealing. So why does the Torah accentuate the stealing? And the answer, the Medrash says, that because how did it happen that a generation came to a point that they had to be destroyed? Hashem felt there was no other way out, and everything was destroyed except for everything in the water. Because we know that the ayin hara does not go into the water. That's why all the fish lived. There was no fish destroyed. Mankind, human beings and animals and everything in the world, but not inside the water. Because tahara comes from the source of mayim is so strong that it is able to uplift a person's tameh. The only way he becomes tahor is if he goes into a mikveh. A woman is in a state of not being able to function during life matters until she goes to a mikveh. We take mayim shelanu and we bake our matzahs, which is one of the most heightened mitzvahs, because there's no other mitzvah that it says that it's meichla demhemenusa, that it enhances and enriches and drenches our mitzias with emunah. I mean, the person feels he's lacking in his emunah, and certain things happen, and then the thought, lo aleinu, come into mind. Why is HaKadosh Baruch Hu doing this? How could it happen? Why isn't he preventing? Those type of questions come with lack of emunah. But eating the first night of Pesach matzah, the Zohar HaKadosh says that as you are eating that matzah, you are completely uplifting and, like I said, drenching our neshamas with emunah, that it's dripping with emunah by the end of the eating of the matzah. We don't feel it. But in moment of test, it'll come out that our emunah was strengthened. And in that moment of concern, it'll jump to the plate of the emunah that was enriched because of the matzah. So how did they fall so low that they had to be destroyed? So the Medrash answers the question and says, al daita shel Torah, that they said, ein anu mevakshim. The in-between of the Torah, we're not interested in. You see, no one goes from a high madrega or from a decent madrega to total oblivion. It comes from steps. So what were the steps of the Dora Malbul? So the Medrash says, Daito shel Torah, and the Meforshim explain, what does that mean? And the Medrash even gives an example, that there was a man sitting with a barrel of pickles. The lashon of the Medrash is tarmusim, which is some other thing than pickles, but I don't even know if any of us heard of that vegetable. Anyway, so let's say pickles. And somebody walked by and decided to take a pickle. And the owner said, what are you doing? He said, well, you can't take me to Bezdin or to court because it's pachos mishava pruta. Something that you steal or that you deal in that is at least has the value of 2 cents. But this pickle didn't have. It's only one pickle, and it was probably a small pickle. And then the second person came and did the exact same thing until the person, this is what the Medrash says, until the person had no parnasa. So they were trying to get in between the waves of halacha, that only if it's a shavapruta can you have a taina to me and take me to a bezdin or to court. But I didn't do that, so you can't do it. But meantime, it put the man out of business. In all these examples that the Medrash gives, boils down to the fact that they try to get away with being implicated and swimming between the waves. And that's why the Torah uses the lashon chamas, which means robbery, but it also means anger. And that's why Sarah said to Avram, Chamasi alecha. I'm angry at you. You didn't tell her off for doing this. She wasn't treating me nicely, but you kept quiet. You held back your words. And the Gemara says that Reb Chelbo in Gemara Brachas, that they used to steal from the Oni. So the Gemara asks, the Oni has nothing to steal. If he's a real Oni, he doesn't have possession. So what were they stealing? So the Gemara answers and says, Lahoshiv al Shlomo, which means that when somebody passes you and says good morning, and you don't want to be bothered, it's not the Gevir in Stott that's saying to you, good morning. It's a regular, simple person. You're stealing from that person. That's what the Gemara says, that stealing from the oni means, because physical possession he really doesn't have. But he needed that good morning. I remember that when I was in Florida one time, I used to walk the boardwalk early in the morning, and there was an old lady sitting on the bench. She must have been 95, so you could tell really an elderly person. And one day I was late. So she said to me in Yiddish, I'm sitting here already 3.5 hours waiting for your good morning. Ich wart schon 3,5 Stunden auf euer Good Morgen. So we cannot take away from stealing. Doesn't just mean putting your hand into someone's pocket. But if somebody passes you and says hello or good morning, and you don't want to be bothered, you're just moving on. What are you being bothered for? The 3 seconds that it takes to answer, to say good morning? But from that person who needs that good morning, you're taking it away from him. And his whole day can be different. A smile with a strong, meaningful good morning, have a nice day, and goodbye, and move on. But that can uplift someone, and that's why the Torah says it was not nigzer on that door to be destroyed until of the Chamas. Because Chamas means that they didn't have the goodwill to want to spread good feeling even, that they were becoming miserable human beings, and that they were able to not just by black and white, good and bad, but it was the in-betweens. And that's what the Medrash that we quoted says, that they did not start to fall to where they were until that they were over. They said, Ein anu mevakshim, we are not interested in the daito shel Torah. There's people who always ask, show me where it says that you can't do this and this. The Gemara quite often has a lengthy discussion. And the Gemara is asking a shaila, and they're debating to Amoraim, to Tanoim, and the Gemara ends up and says, we're not telling you the bottom line. Go outside and see how Yidden behave and what they do. And that's the psak. So it's sometimes we cannot point and say, well, this is it. This was, that area, that arena, was the problem of Dor HaMabul. And that's why it doesn't say that it wasn't nigzer only until, even though some midrashim say, until they institutionalized the hanhaga of male marriage. And when they did that, then they wrote ksubas, and they wrote contracts, marriage contracts. That's when the Gezerah came that they're going to be destroyed. But not until then. But the Torah specifies the Chamas because it trickled down to every aspect of life in Olam Hazeh and how you can steal from another person and the difference it could make in the entire world and in life. And that's why the Gemara says that the three Bavas, Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, and Baba Basra, are all Nezikin. Now we know that Baba Kama is talking about regular Nezek, that someone's animal goes out and gores another animal, goes into a field and destroys everything. That's how we see real first-class Nezek. But there's a different level by Baba Metzia. It doesn't talk about animals going into fields, that's Baba Kama. But Baba Metzia will talk about someone have a talus. And is it all yours or all mine? It's a more refined type of nezek. And then it goes into Baba Basra, that if someone has a field and he doesn't like the smell of the animals that you have, it's a more refined yet type of nezek. But it's not goring, it's not killing, and it's not, but you live there, it's your yard, and when the person answers you and said, listen, this is my yard, and if you don't like the smell of the animals that I am having, that's too bad, this is my yard. That's Baba Basra. And that's all called Nazikin, because we can harm people in the most innocent ways and the most blatant ways, and it comes out as hezek to the person, bein Adam lachavero. Now, at the end of our Sedra, it mentions Nimrod. He wanted, and he was called Nimrod, Rashi says, Lahamrid es kol ha'olam neged HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He instigated the Dor HaFloga, that when they realized that they could take mud and bake the mud, put it into the hot water or into the sun, and bricks will come out. So they wanted to go and they wanted to fight with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the one who instigated this whole trend in society was Nimrod. Now, Nimrod, the Pasuk 2 Psukim later says that Ashur, who was a comrade of Nimrod, and Rashi brings it, and I mentioned this very briefly before Yom Kippur, he said that this is not for me. I see this guy Nimrod is going out for full destruction, that he is interested in fighting with God, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not going to work, and it's never going to happen. So he moved away, and he moved away to Iraq. And he moved and built the city of Nineveh. Now, Nineveh, they say, is the Iraqi city of Mosul. That is Nineveh. Many bring it. And he built the city, and he wanted to get away. He saw, Rashi says, his sons, his children, were falling for the falsehood of Nimrod, and he wanted them to get away, and he moved over there. Now, from Nimrod, from the time of when he moved from Nimrod, and his name was Ashur. Ashur went and built Nineveh to the story of Yonah that we lane on Yom Kippur as our Haftorah, and the whole city did tshuva. They were goyim, they did tshuva, and they lived on, and the king of Nineveh was Paro. The Paro from Mitzrayim, the story of Pesach, that Paro was, it says, Lo nishar ad echad, that everyone died out, ad echad, until Paro. And he ran away and he became king in Nineveh. So says the Medrash and all of the Chazal. And Paro told the people, you better listen to this prophet, because I witnessed in my lifetime my whole country be destroyed and my people died on the sea because we didn't listen. And they did such tshuva and everything. These were goyim. And they did tshuva. What was the schus, they say? Because 1,400 years before, Ashur moved away and got away from Nimrod. Bad influence. Never be hesitant to part ways with someone that you really know is a terrible influence. Doesn't mean there has to be a fight, and it doesn't have to be confrontation, but it always has to have some sort of stamina, some backbone, with tact and diplomacy. You can part ways with someone, and sometimes for the shalom, give a different reason. Don't say why that you feel that it's a pure bad influence. So that's what he did, Asher, and he was able, his great-great-great-great-grandchildren were able to be saved, and they were not destroyed in the 3 days that Yonah said to them, I'm warning you, in 3 days, Nineveh hafoches, Nineveh is going to be turned over on its head if you don't do tshuva. And they all did tshuva. What was the schus? He parted ways from Nimrod, the bad influence. Now, there is a big debate about Noach when it came to the actual flood. Because the pasuk says that he did not go into the teva, mipnei me'amabel, till the water came up to his neck. In other words, and Rashi says, hayamamin ve'eno mamin. He believed and he didn't believe that there was going to be the flood. So we see that here where he was standing 120 years building a teva, building an ark. Anybody who passed by, he said to them, they said, what are you building here? He said, I'm building an ark because the world is in trouble. They laughed in his face. But then Rashi says, deep down, he really had great question as to what was going to happen. And Rashi said, Miktane emuna hoya. Hoya mamin ve'enema. He was like from the small believers. But when the water already got up to his neck and he saw it's for real, it put the water, he didn't even go in then. Till the water pushed him in. Tonight is the Rizhiner Rebbe, Rabbi Yisrael Rizhin, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh Levracha, his yahrzeit, Zechusa Yogein Aleinu. And he, and some attribute it to the Koznitzer Maggid, but they were Chaverim, even though Rabbi Yisrael was much younger than the Koznitzer Maggid. But they said it doesn't mean that he had less emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he was Maimon or not Maimon, because the Torah was made, he was a Tzaddik Gomer. But what it means is that Hayamam and Veinamam in himself, that if he didn't hold himself to be a Tzaddik, he held he was like everybody else. And if he was going to be saved, then the whole world deserved to be saved, not only he himself. So if he deserved to be saved and the others would end up being saved, he can't go in and start the mabul yet till the people are coming. And that's how they touched that up, that out of the humility that he had in himself, that he held that the machshava was mo'elis, that if he decided and thought, no, this is going to be, then it would lock out all the people who were like Beinim in between and not give them a chance. But because he didn't believe really in himself, he didn't conclude that it had to be the Mabul and that maybe the world would be saved. So when we look at other people, so we have to assume that if we see someone in the car on Shabbos, that he's going to a hospital because he has to save a life or he has to save his own life. Not right away say, oh, I thought this guy was a Shomer Shabbos. I see he's not. I saw him driving a car on Shabbos. We have to refine a little bit, and sometimes a lot, our attitude, how we look at people. You know, somebody walks into shul and he's wearing a small yarmulke. So in some places, the Lubavitcher Rebbe once said to the people, a stranger walks in and people begin to look at him. I mean, the guy begins to feel like an outcast. And people are staring at him and looking at him. Why not, as soon as you see a stranger walk over, put out your hand and say, Shalom Aleichem, welcome. Make the person feel like he's part and parcel of Klal Yisrael. Is it just because he looks different? He's not wearing the black hat or the shtreimel, and he's wearing just the yarmulke, so we already passed him off as some third-rate Jew in practice and deserving of third-rate treatment? So we have to heighten that sensitivity with other people. Now, it says that the criticism of Noach was that he did not daven for his generation. And indeed, Kabbalah Sforim, some quote the Zohar. The Zohar definitely says that Hevel went into Moshe Rabbeinu, but there's also statements that Noach went into Moshe Rabbeinu. He was a Gilgal, because he came back to fix the fact, not that he did Averos, he was a tzaddik Tomim, but he never davened for the people the whole 120 years. He didn't stop and say, Rabbanu Shloim, help them do tshuva, daven for them, and want that they should be saved. So we find that Moshe Rabbeinu indeed had an entire life of davening for Klal Yisrael. Every time they tripped in the midbar, in the desert, he was there to defend them and to ask for mercy and rachamim, to be able to bring up the level of what they needed desperately to be saved. And indeed it says that that's the reason that Moshe Rabbeinu's life began in a teva, that his mother put him into a little box underwater. That was the teva that saved him, because he was a neshama of Noach who was saved in a ark, in a teva. And that Basia, Bas Paro, who pulled him out of the water, Basia was her name, and Basia are the Oisias Teva. Tov, Yud, Vez, Hey, transposed spells Basia. Because he was a continuation from Noach. Now, the place that we see that Moshe Rabbeinu davened for Klal Yisrael the most was by the Maisa Egel, because he went and said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, forgive them, v'im ayin, and if you don't forgive them, mecheni nomi sifrecha asher kasavta. And he was a little bit out of order. He is criticized by Chazal how he spoke to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu answered him and said, the ones who defiled me and sinned against me, I will wipe out. Not everyone, though. And the word mecheni are the oisias mei noyach. Mecheni is mei noyach, because that was the ultimate position that he took to make sure that Klal Yisrael was forgiven, and that they should be able to be zoicha to the midah of rachamim, which remained Yom Kippur for us forever. In other words, Yom Kippur is not just a day of forgiveness because it once happened by Moshe Rabbeinu for Klal Yisrael. It became etched into the essence of time of Yud Tishrei, that every second, minute, hour, the entire day is drenched with Rachamei Shamayim. And that's why the Bnei Yissaschar always objected when he heard somebody call Yom Kippur the Yom Hadin. And he answered and said, no, that's Rosh Hashanah. Yom Hadin is not for Yom Kippur. It's Yom HaRachamim, because they went out freed from Aveira. They came home and ate big sudos, confident, maminim, b'nei maminim, that they were forgiven and that they're going to have. How do we know? Why do we go home after Yom Kippur and have a big suda? How do we know we were forgiven? We davened, we fasted, but how do we know what Shemayim did with us? And the answer is because we're maminim, b'nei maminim, that if not in our own schos, it's being part of a Klal Yisrael. We are forgiven. And that's why we are able to leave the day as a day of Yom HaChesed and Rachamim. So Moshe Rabbeinu came back in that format from being Noach to being Moshe Rabbeinu, and getting the ultimate forgiveness for Klal Yisrael, which remained in the framework of time as a day of forgiveness, and relived, not just commemorating that it once happened, but it was re-happening each and every year. Now, when Noach came out of the Teva, it says, Vayiven Mizbeach Lashem. He built a Mizbeach, and the Medrash says, don't read the word Vayiven, and he built, but read it as Vayoven, and he understood. He understood that the purpose of the entire Mabul was now to be worried about another person. How did he derive that? Because he said, why did Hashem tell me to put two animals, a male and female treif animal, but of the kosher, I had to take 7. 7 male and 7 female. 2 and 2 would have been enough to continue for Doros, that type of Metzias. But he didn't, and for him to eat kosher, 2 kosher animals would have been enough. But he looked at it that people need korbanos because we are human beings. He learned from the Mabul that we are subject, to trip and to fail sometimes in our mission in life. But how do we stand up and continue the next day with forgiveness, with rachamim? On our side, we have to do tshuva. We have to at least feel sorry for what we did. On the other side, we need kapara from Shamayim. And the medium is the Mizbeach. Today, the Mizbeach are our tables. When a person has on Shabbos 10 guests around his table, that's a Mizbeach, that's kapara. That's why for 500 years in France, people used to die and they took their tables, their dining room tables, and made the aron, the casket, out of their dining room table. Because there could be no bigger schus for a person than having the schus of feeding the poor. You know, the Mishnah in Sanhedrin lists, these people are zoicha to olam haba. This person, this. Then it says, v'yesh, that don't have olam haba, and they start listing. So the Gemara asks, what happened to Micha? Micha left Mitzrayim, and he came into the Midbar with a little idol, And he kept that idol with him into Eretz Yisrael. Into Eretz Yisrael. And what did he do? He used to give every day incense, ketoris, to the idol, but he placed the incense and the idol near the ketoris of the Mishkan. So that when the real ketoris went up to Shemayim in a pillar of a cloud of ketoris, that his avodah zarah ketoris mixed in. So the Medrash says the Malachim wanted to kill him the first day he did it, because it came out a terrible, disgusting smell. It wasn't a reach nichoyach ta HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It was disgusting, all the avodah zarah. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't let them ever, and they wanted to destroy him every day for the 39 years. And that's why he was in the fourth machna in the back, because the cloud didn't want him in with the avodah zarah. And he was not killed, and his name is not mentioned as one of those who does not get Olam Haba, says the Medrash, because he fed the poor every day. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to the Malach, you want to disturb him? Not him. You want to destroy him? Not him. Because he is feeding the poor every day. And even though he's spoiling my ketoris, I do not want to let you kill him because he's feeding the poor. So this lesson of having rachmanis for others, that the Medrash says, Vayoven, he understood that the reason that he had to bring 2 treif but 7 of the kosher was not for himself or mankind to eat kosher, because there would have been plenty of kosher just from the 2, but to have plenty of animals, kosher animals, for the korbanos, so people could have a kapara when they need the kapara. And that's the pshat that they say in the Medrash that says, Vayorach esreach hanichoyach, that Noach produced a korban, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu smelled, and he right away smelled the korban of Avram Avinu and Mishael, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So the Chazal say, because they saw that when Hashem showed them the korban of Noach, that Noach was bringing it purely for HaKadosh Baruch Hu and not for himself, not to have the kosher meals that he would need the rest of his life, or his children would need, or his grandchildren, but that they saw that he did it for the sake of Klal Yisrael, to have available kapara when they're going to need kapara each and every day of their lives. And that's why Avram Avinu put himself on the line for Sodom, and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were ready to be thrown into the fiery furnace for the sake of Klal Yisrael, to make the Kiddush Hashem berabim, and that they should have the great benefit from it. And that's why the Medrash says, Vayoven, that Noach understood. He fully comprehended the benefit of helping another Yid and preparing the landscape so that other Yidden would be able to benefit. Now, Noach sent out the raven. And the Medrash says why he picked on the raven. Because he realized that maybe the raven will get lost outside with the water. He didn't know what was going to happen to him. And the Medrash says, because the only animal that violated Hashem's command of not having any intimate relationships on the Teva that year was the raven, the Orev. And Noach wanted to destroy him. He didn't care if he'd get lost, and that his wife would have no mate and there'd be no more ravens in the world, because he felt he was the only one that stepped forward to do a personal desire, and the only one who crossed that line and who violated what they were told. So it didn't bother him, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him that when Eliyahu HaNavi is going to be on Har Carmel and they want to kill him, and he went into hiding, how is he going to live? So they brought from the kitchen of Gehazi and brought meat from him. Who brought the meat? It was the ravens. So Noach was told that you may look at a human being or a creation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even a bird, that it's useless for the world. There's no such thing in creation that Hashem created, and the item, the person, or the animal, or the bird is useless and you want to eliminate him. We do not write off Yidden who we look at as Mahartzayach u'Machrivayach Mimech Yetzeyu, that usually, like we saw this week, there were Jews in the groups lauding and applauding the Hamas when they beheaded babies. And many Jews would say, halavai, they would have been killed together with all the Hamas. But this is a result of our universities, who were allowed to soak in and hire all communists and Marxists to become professors. So you had 2 generations of that type of poisoning of the minds of the youth. And what do you expect to come out from the youth after listening to a professor badmouth Israel, how bad they are and how terrible they are against the poor Palestinians? Listening to that type of brainwashing for all of that time, how did we expect anything else to come out with this terrible anti-Jewish and anti-Israeli sentiment from this negativity? Now, we know that the world was destroyed by water, because it was water that the Chazal say the Torah was supposed to be given by Noach. And since they didn't deserve the Torah, it went 40 days of Torah by Moshe Rabbeinu to 40 days of rain. Ein mayim ela Torah, ein Torah ela mayim. That this way of the forcefulness of Shemayim coming down to this world resulted in their terrible destruction. But we know that a person is able to acquire the best through Torah. And a person, as I mentioned just before, that Tahara, comes to this world through water. That a person goes to a mikveh, and in the water, no one was affected because there can be no ayin hara. And that's the reason that we eat on Shabbos so much fish. If you take a Yiddish society, they're eating gefilte fish, they're eating salmon, they're eating herring by Shalosh. It's fish, fish, fish. Because the three things that in Bereshis last week that it said, Vayevarech, that Hashem blessed was man, the water, the fish, and Shabbos. Vayevarech Elokim es yom hashvi'i vayekadesh oso. So on Shabbos, man eats the fish because in the Arizal says that tzaddikim are nisgalgal, they go into the actual fish. So we eat fish on Shabbos that come from the mayim that were never under a ayin hara, and they were never under and subject to anything that was negative. So we can learn that we are given vehicles to strengthen us and to uplift us. If a person learns for 2 hours, he provides a fortification. When I'm on the radio, the gentleman who interviews me always asks me at the end of the interview, well, we have 2 minutes left. Do you have any message that you want to say at the end of your interview? And I always say the same thing. Lo b'chayil v'lo b'koyach kiyem baruchi. To the boys in Eretz Israel who are learning, and to the boys who are learning here, and the men who come home after a day of toil and work and open a Gemara or go to a shir, whatever, add on something, because that is the true weapon how we have survived to today. Not the mighty army. Yeah, we have to do bidei adam, a maisa, that we have to take action, and we have to protect, and we have a chiyuv to guard, and all of that. But don't fool ourselves. Don't think the mightiness of the army, because 140 million Arabs could have just overrun Eretz Israel without the machinery. Against the 2 million in the beginning, and today it's 8 or 9 million or 10 million, but no comparison in the multitudes. But it was the koyach of the Torah and the mitzvahs and the chesed that Klal Yisrael does, that's our protective shield. So I always concluded with that same message, because you see from the Mabul that the water that could have brought them to the highest level of tahara, and that it never affected even the Mabul, anything in the water, that protective shield became the destructive shield, because you find that people who are Talmidei Chachamim and went sour were always the most destructive force by Klal Yisrael. That when they took Dr. Freehoff from Pittsburgh, the Reform, and the one from Toronto who lived to 102, and they made them, those two, their poiskim, how they twisted and draped, but they were the biggest Talmidei Chachamim that they had amongst all the rabbinate. Most of them couldn't even read Hebrew. But these two had learned in yeshivas and became Reform rabbis. So they took halacha, twisted it, reshaped it, and everything. They became the biggest destructive force that could have been to be able to justify and rationalize the twists in the Reform movement, how to throw the Torah out the window and how to defy it in daily life. So the Koyach HaTorah Ein Mayim Ela Torah is the forcefulness that carries the day for us, and we should be able to live by it and realize it. And I wish each and every one of you that I hope you're davening and giving an extra pruta tzedakah tatzil mimoves, Give it l'shem shamayim, not because someone's going to be proud of you that you did it, and not because you're going to get the credit in shamayim, but give it purely for Klal Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael that are besakona today, that things should turn out l'toiv. A gute Nacht.